The murder that crossed state lines. On a quiet stretch of highway in the American Southwest, a single discovery at dawn would unravel a crime that spanned multiple states, expose a carefully hidden double life, and reveal how one fatal mistake nearly allowed a murderer to disappear forever. The Murder That Crossed State Lines is a gripping true crime story that follows the investigation from a nameless body found far from home to a meticulous trail of evidence that ultimately brought justice, showing how distance, deception, and misplaced trust collided with the persistence of those determined to uncover the truth. The discovery happened quietly, almost by accident, on a cold Arizona morning when the world was still half asleep. A long-haul truck driver, exhausted from driving through the night, pulled his rig onto the shoulder of a remote highway outside Flagstaff just as the sun began to rise. Fog rolled low across the road, clinging to the trees and softening the distant mountains. As he stepped out of his cab to stretch his legs, something near the guardrail caught his attention. It looked like trash at first, discarded clothing tangled in weeds, but the shape was wrong. Too deliberate, too human. When he moved closer, he saw a hand protruding from the dirt, pale against the dark soil. By the time local deputies arrived, the scene had already taken on the weight that only death can bring. The body was partially buried, wrapped in heavy plastic, and positioned in a way that suggested haste rather than care. There were no identifying documents nearby, no phone, no wallet, no personal effects. Whoever left her there had intended for her to remain nameless. The victim was a woman, likely in her early 30s. The medical examiner later confirmed signs of a violent struggle, defensive wounds on her arms, bruising around the neck, and trauma consistent with manual strangulation. The cause of death was clear. The motive was not. Time of death was estimated at 3 to 4 days prior, placing her last moments somewhere far from the quiet stretch of highway where she was found at 81st. Investigators assumed the case would follow a familiar pattern. Someone local, a personal dispute, a crime of passion. But the absence of any missing persons report in Arizona that matched her description raised early concern. Fingerprints were processed and run through state and federal databases. There were no matches. Dental records came back inconclusive. For detectives, this lack of identity was troubling. People do not disappear without someone noticing. Families call, friends worry, employers ask questions. Unless the person who caused the disappearance believed distance could erase connection. 3 days later, nearly 600 miles away, the first crack in the mystery appeared. A woman walked into a police station in Amarillo, Texas, visibly shaken and holding her phone like a lifeline. She was there to report her sister missing. Her name was Rachel Miller. Rachel was 32 years old, a freelance photographer who traveled frequently throughout the Southwest. According to her sister, Rachel had been driving west for a short assignment in Arizona. She had texted regularly during the trip, sharing photos of roadside diners and desert sunsets. Then, suddenly, the messages stopped. Calls went unanswered. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Rachel was not the kind of person who disappeared without explanation. She was organized, cautious, and dependable. She had no history of substance abuse, no mental health crises, and no known enemies. When Texas authorities entered her information into the National Missing Persons Database, the alert immediately caught the attention of investigators in Arizona. Within hours, dental records confirmed what detectives had already suspected. The Jane Doe found outside Flagstaff was Rachel Miller. The case shifted instantly from local homicide to interstate investigation. Jurisdiction expanded. Agencies coordinated. What had begun as a body on the roadside became a story that stretched across multiple states, each holding a piece of the truth. As investigators began reconstructing Rachel's final days, a clearer picture of her life emerged. She had built a modest but respected career photographing small towns, abandoned places, and forgotten corners of America. Her work was quiet and intimate, focused on atmosphere rather than people. She often traveled alone, something her family worried about, but Rachel defended fiercely. She believed awareness and preparation were enough to keep her safe. Phone records revealed that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Rachel had been in frequent contact with numbers she had not previously called. The conversations were long, sometimes lasting over an hour, often late at night. This number belonged to a man named Evan Brooks, a resident of Albuquerque, New Mexico. When contacted by police, Evan appeared cooperative. He said he met Rachel briefly at a roadside diner near Gallup, New Mexico. According to him, they talked about photography, shared travel stories, and exchanged numbers. He claimed that was the extent of their interaction. He insisted he had not seen her since. But digital evidence contradicted his account almost immediately. Cell tower data placed Rachel's phone near Evan's apartment complex on the night she was last heard from. Surveillance footage from a gas station showed Rachel's vehicle following another car matching Evan's, heading west toward Arizona. The timing aligned perfectly with the estimated window of her death. When confronted with this information, Evan changed his story. He admitted Rachel had visited him, but said they argued and she left upset. He could not explain why her phone never connected to another tower after that night. He could not explain why her car was never found. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Evan's apartment. At first glance, the space appeared ordinary. Clean, organized. Nothing seemed out of place. But one detail stood out to experienced detectives: a freshly painted bedroom wall. The paint smelled new, sharp, and chemical, as though it had been applied only days earlier. When forensic technicians sprayed luminol across the surface, the wall lit up in streaks of blue. Blood, not enough to suggest Rachel was killed there, but enough to prove she had been injured. GPS data from Evan's vehicle placed him driving through Arizona during the same period Rachel's body was believed to have been dumped. Receipts from gas stations, time-stamped and geolocated, traced a clear path across state lines. Evan had traveled from New Mexico into Arizona, then returned, all within a narrow window of time. Crossing state lines changed everything. Federal authorities were notified. The FBI joined the case, bringing additional resources and experience with interstate crimes. What they uncovered next revealed that Rachel was not chosen at random. Evan Brooks had constructed a carefully controlled public life. He was married. He had a young child. He worked in logistics for a regional shipping company. Neighbors described him as quiet and polite. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that immediately suggested danger. But online, Evan was someone else entirely, under multiple aliases. He frequented forums and platforms used by solo travelers. He offered advice, suggested routes, recommended cheap motels and scenic detours. He presented himself as knowledgeable, helpful, and safe. Investigators identified dozens of conversations with women who traveled alone. Most interactions never progressed beyond messaging. A few led to brief meetings. Rachel's case was the only one that ended in death. The theory that emerged was chilling in its simplicity. Evan believed that by killing someone from out of state and disposing of the body in a different jurisdiction, he could delay identification and complicate investigation. Distance, he assumed, would create confusion, and for a time, it nearly worked. What ultimately unraveled his plan was a single overlooked item: Rachel's camera. Her family insisted she never traveled without it, yet it was not found in her body, her car, or among her belongings. Months into the investigation, while monitoring online marketplaces, an FBI analyst noticed a listing for a used camera. The serial number matched Rachel's missing equipment, exactly an undercover agent arranged to purchase. When the camera arrived, forensic specialists examined the memory card. Most of the photos had been deleted, but one remained, hidden deep within the file structure. It appeared to be an accidental shot, taken indoors. A motel room mirror reflected part of the scene. Rachel stood in the foreground, unaware. Behind her, partially visible, was Evan Brooks, alive, together, smiling. That image became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Evan was arrested without incident. During interrogation, he maintained his innocence until presented with the evidence. Phone records, GPS data, blood traces, surveillance footage, and the photograph. Faced with overwhelming proof, his denials collapsed into silence. The trial drew quiet attention. There were no dramatic outbursts, no confessions, no spectacle. Just facts methodically laid out. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Evan Brooks was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Rachel's family attended every day of the trial. They listened as her final hours were reconstructed in detail. When the verdict was read, her sister spoke briefly to reporters. She said Rachel believed the world was more good than bad. She trusted people. That trust, she said, should never be a death sentence. The case of Rachel Miller stands as a reminder that violence does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind kindness. Sometimes it offers help. And sometimes it believes that crossing a line on a map is enough to escape justice. But truth has a way of traveling. It follows patterns. It leaves traces. And eventually, it catches up. Rachel's story does not end where her life did. It lives on in the lessons it leaves behind, in the warnings it quietly delivers, and in the reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes are vulnerable to one simple truth: Someone always notices what you miss. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories, share it with others, and don't forget to drop a comment below telling us what you learned from this case. Your support helps keep these stories told and remembered.